In this video, we're going to go over taking the image plane, the basic image plane model we created, and to make the mannequin model with it, a very basic level human model with primitive forms. So we're going to, let me switch on the image plane. There's the image plane we set up. I created a tighter grid for this so we could get a little finer detail on things. And you would change your grid here. So you go up to your panel tools and you would right click and you would go to grid options and you'd change the numbers down to a little tighter level. Okay, so if you want to do that, well, you don't have to do that right away in this lesson, but you can do it later on. Okay, and then we'll be using grid snap up here in our status bar. So that'll be useful. I might switch it on and off a little bit, but that'll be useful in this lesson. So, all right. So we have our image plane loaded up from our earlier image plane lesson. And let me show you what we're going to be modeling. We're basically going to model. I have to turn off the grid in this view. We're basically creating with Polygon primitives. We're going to create Polygon primitives. We're going to scale them. We're going to be changing pivots. We're going to be moving things. We're going to be grouping things, and we're going to actually do a mirror. I'm going to show you a kind of sophisticated way to do mirroring later on in the lesson. Okay, let's get on with things. So I'm going to switch these off. That's what we're going to be trying to achieve. So in our image plane here, it might be a little bright here, so I'm going to click on the image plane here so it's selected. So now you'll notice over here in the channel box, it's come up here. It's selected in the outliner, and then you go down to attribute editor if you want to change its transparency. So I'm going to dial it down to like possibly 0.5. Yeah, that might be a little better. Maybe even a little lower. We're going down to 0.35. Yeah, there you go. Okay. And then you can change this to however you like, whatever value you like. If you like it full on, that's fine. Okay, so now I have that here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to use a few different Polygon primitive forms. So we're going to use a cylinder and a sphere. So basically they're over here on our shelf. So the first thing we would create is our sphere, which is for our head there. So I'm going to move this up to the head there, and I have grid snap on. So I'm going to go over to my toolbar, pick up my move tool, or I could use the X key to snap it. There we go. So it's snapping. And then there's hotkeys as well for moving things. So your select would be Q, move would be W, rotate is E, and scale is R. So I can either go to here for scaling or I can type R. I'm going to type R right now. So type R, and then if you want to do global scale, pick on the center box. Okay. And also, sometimes you might be in shaded mode when you do this, so that it would look like this. So I would, for this operation, I would switch to wireframe. And if you want to, you can switch those on and off, okay? Or you can type, you have hotkeys for these as well. So if you did type 4, you'll get wireframe. If you type 5, you'll get shaded mode, okay? 4, 5. All right, so I want wireframe right now, and I'm going to pick on that. I don't want to be any chance of scaling, so I'm going to go back up and put myself in select mode, or I could type Q. So I just typed Q right now, okay? Now I can zoom in with the Alt and right mouse button, or I can type F for frame, and it'll take me right. If your object is selected, it'll frame onto that object, so that's a handy trick, okay? So I'll zoom out a little bit with the Alt or Option key and right mouse button, just to get a little better view. So this is pretty good. I'm gonna just model through this pretty quickly, so I'm not gonna be worrying too much about the precision of these. Some of the later models, I have them a little bit more precise, but this exercise in general is just more just to learn about using different forms and how to group things and move things around. Okay. So yeah, there's this here. And then if you want to, you can always go into the channel box and you give like precision scaling mounts if you want. Okay, so that's good enough for this exercise. All right, so I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to create a cylinder for the torso. Okay, so now cylinder's here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it. So I can type R for scale, or I can pick on the icon. Okay, and then if you want to globally scale something, pick on the box in the middle. Okay, so that's scaled it all around. If you see scale values, they're the same over here in the channel box. Okay, now I want to scale it up. I want to make it just scale it in one direction along to get the torso length. But if you notice, I'm having an issue now too, because the center of the torso is not where the center of the whole scene is. So the centers aren't matching. So what's happening is it's scaling beyond his basically his crotch line, his pelvis. Okay, so now there's a couple ways I could do this. I could move this up and just kind of, you know, keep kind of scaling till I get the right spot, or I could change the pivot on the object. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go into the move tool, and to change pivot, we've gone on before, but if you type a D, and then your tool widget will change its look. It will start to look like this. So the key thing is to move by axis. So you're going to want to move it down. So I have grid snap on. So I'm going to turn that off. I mean, it's pretty good here, but I'm going to show you a trick to get it right on the plane there. Now, we've done this with a cube before. So I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to move this down below. Okay. And I'm going to hold the V key. I'm going to hold V key while I move this up. And if you notice if you type V, you hold it, you'll notice it's changing that up there. See, now it's going to snap to point. And like, look what will happen if I press the X key. All of a sudden, and this is a handy tool because sometimes you don't always want to have snap on. So you can use the, X for grid, C for curve, and V for point. Okay. Now, don't get worried about learning all these hotkeys right now, but just shouting them out right now so you can get used to them. If you want, you can just turn it on right now. Okay. But then you have to remember to turn it off later. So this is going to do a handy little thing. Is it snapped up to the bottom line of faces on this object. Okay. So now I know the vertex is right at the bottom here, the bottom of the object. All right. So I'm going to type D. That's a handy trick. So, you know, definitely that's one to remember. Okay, so now if you notice, if I'm using the keys here, or the icons, that's still pressed down. I don't want that now because I don't know how it'll snap to something up here. So let's see, we'll see. Yep, you see? It snapped because it's looking for points. So it looked for points there. So I don't want that. So you got to make sure to switch it off. Or that's why the hotkeys sometimes are useful. Okay, so I switch it on to snap to grid. So now I'm going to move it down. I move it right to there's a grid point right at the crotch line there. All right, so now I notice, oh, maybe it's a little too tall. Maybe I want to move it down a little bit. So now I'm going to go back to scaling. So I'm going to go scale. But now if you notice, it's going to scale from this endpoint there at the end of the object. Now this is very useful if you're, in general, scaling from like especially limbs on a character or something like that. It's generally because these are pivot points, they're axes. So you definitely want to generally have it scaling from something like that. All right, so now I'm going to, let's move this down a little bit. Okay. And now I'm going to basically create the little neck there. So basically it's just another cylinder, and it's also kind of non-proportional. So now I'm going to select this, and I'm going to do the move key. And then in a previous lesson, we showed you how to move and clone. So if you hold on your shift key and you're moving your object, you can move it up. So now it's snapping to grid right now. I I don't want that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do that trick again. I'm going to turn off grid snap and I'm going to turn off point snap. And I'm going to pull this down and boom, voila. Let me turn off the image plane for a second. Turn this on. See what happened? It popped right onto that final plane on this object, which is exactly what I want. So now I'm going to turn this back on so I can see, and I'm going to scale this. Okay, so now I'm going to pick on the scale icon. I'm going to pick the object. I want to scale it. I'm going to scale it globally first. Okay, so I'm going to be scaling it towards what the, let me zoom in a little bit so we can get a better kind of view of the neck. Okay, yeah, that's about right. So now I did a global scale on it just to get its volume. And now I'm going to do what they call non-proportional scale. So I'm scaling this down. Okay. So there's ways to get all this stuff very precise, and we'll be going over that in class over the future lessons. But right now, just get things in close spots to where you think they should be. Okay. So now, if we go out to this window, so now basically I have the torso and the neck and the head. I don't need any more new objects. So what I'm going to be doing pretty much is just copying the rest of these objects and scaling. So basically what I'll do is I'll go back to this window. Like for the leg, I would do this, and I would probably go, let's see, I would go into edit, duplicate. Okay, now I've duplicated it. Now I'm going to rotate it. Okay. While we're at it, I can show you a trick. If you hold the J key, your rotations now will go on in 15-degree increments. So you might want to try that out. That's kind of fun. Okay. So now I'm going to hit the F key for zooming in on it. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So now I want to move it over. So I have the grids, as I said before, that's why I made the grids a little smaller. So they kind of match a little bit. If I was actually modeling this precision, I would probably even make the grids smaller. But then it gets a little hard to see. All right, so what I'm going to do is move this over. So I'm going to move it over to a grid point right there. Okay, so I'm going to go hit on my move key or my move icon. And I'm going to switch back. I don't want to be snapping to points. I want to be snapping to grids. Okay, so I'm going to move that over. There we go. All right, same thing. I'm going to do my little scale trick. Okay, so I'm going to scale this down, and I want to scale it globally first. I wanted to get it just kind of in the proportion zone. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm looking at the DaVinci drawing here in the background and kind of seeing what's going on. Okay, so I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Okay, and then I want to non-proportion scale. I want to scale it down. Okay, so it kind of matches the thigh. There we go. Now the next thing I want is I'll use the head for the shoulder here. So I'm gonna move. I'm gonna use my move trick. I'm gonna hit shift. It's gonna clone it. Okay, so I'm gonna move it to position, which is about right around there. And then I'm going to, I already have grid snap on. So I'm gonna move it down, move it there. So it's a little too big. So I can either pick on the scale icon or I can press R. I'm gonna press R for that. Okay, scale it down. Okay. Now, if we were making an animation with this, we're not going to do an animation with it, but I'll show you it anyway. You would want these oriented that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this and I'm going to rotate. I'm going to use my little J trick again. So now it's, oops. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So there we go. Now we have that for the shoulder. Okay. And now I might want to just copy this. So I might just go to edit, duplicate, and then I can rotate this. Okay. So instead of using my little J trick, I can also check over here. I can just type in a number there. So, and I like to have nice even whole numbers. So 90. Then I'm going to go over here I'm going to move. I already have my grid snap on, so it's snapping right. So I'm getting a nice click to the right to the lines there. So it's too big. I got to scale it down. So I'm going to press R or go to the scale icon. I'm going to scale it down. Okay. Scale it in. Okay. So there we go. Now we have the basics of the torso area. And then you just keep copying these things. So like this one now. So when I want to make the elbow, I can just press on the move key, a move icon. I can do the Shift J thing. Usually when you're doing move copies, the move shift that's a fun one to use because you just can take it right there. Like in this one too. I'm gonna just move that down. Okay. And then that one needs a little scaling a little further. Okay. Oops. I didn't, hold on. I need to hold my shift key because I'm going to use that for my hand. Okay. All right. So now I have to use my snap. Oh, I have my snap off. Okay. All right. So that's the basics of just getting these forms here. So that's kind of it there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch. Well, let me put these on a layer. I already have a layer set up. Well, actually, you know what? I'll make another layer. I'll just put these on a layer so I can just make them go. Oops, that one's not on. All right. So now those are, yeah, I'm just gonna set those aside. So I'm gonna press F here to get that zoomed out. So I've already done a bunch of this. So I did the whole half of it. So you can see I did the whole half of the object there. And then I'm gonna show you a couple tricks for what I did with these. So in this one, I think that's body 2. Yeah, body 2. Let's pop this open. So in body 2, what I did was I also created a group. So I grouped all the logical elements of the body. So it's one big group. So now, because you'll want to do this in, like when you, especially when you animate later, you want to have everything in all your bits in a single group, because then what'll happen is you're actually going to move your big movements, like moving an object around a scene. You're going to move it from the higher hierarchy level. We've gone over hierarchy. So you're going to move it from the group level, which is the hierarchy. Okay. Oops. All right. So I'm going to switch that off. Actually, let me pick it there. Right now, I actually, you can see here. So here's a where you're going to use your channel box. I know I realized that in the other views it doesn't look like it, but over here it does. So I'm going to type in 0. So it's going to, because you noticed here, this is moving, this channel box is controlling the hierarchy now. It's not controlling individual parts. Individual parts will still have their own scales and numbers and things like that. Okay. So there's that. I'm going to switch this off. Now I'm going to show you the next thing. Let me turn off the image plane. All right, now that's this group here. All right, so now I've made a bunch of sub-hierarchies, and you'll see why I do this later in a few minutes. So in here, we have things like the torso, we have the head. Now the head is a bunch of units. It's a bunch of elements there. But it gets really important here and for the leg, because they are their own kind of subgroups now. So like, say I want to do something with the leg, I don't have to pick. I can pick all the parts of the leg. I don't have to pick each part, each bit of the leg individually, but I can pick the whole leg as a unit itself. So let me show you what's going to happen there. Now there's something I have to do here. Let me show you this because it's going to be very important for the next part of the lesson. Right now, okay, so if I put on the move key, you'll notice that this is a group, right? I got this group picked, but its pivot is still at the center point. So let's see what happens when I rotate this. It's not gonna work the way we think. See, it's too far. Like that's not actually how a leg would actually rotate. The leg would actually rotate from your hip joint there, which basically functions as your pivot. Okay. So also I'm going to do that with the arm. So you see, notice, let me switch modes here. I've gone over modes before. So I'm going to switch to hierarchy mode. So when I'm in hierarchy mode, when I pick on something, oops, I have to unreference the object. All right. Actually, I can't do that because there's a top hierarchy, which is, so I'm going to have to pick from in here. So I'm going to have to pick inside my chain here. So there we go. So you notice here too, like this is even worse than the arm. The arm is basically going to rotate around where the pelvis is. So that's no good. Okay. So here is something you need to do. And this is moving the pivots on the hierarchies, which you can do also. They have their own pivot points. So you can do this manually. So if I wanted to do that, I can type D, and I can move the pivot up like that. I can move the pivot up like that. Okay. And then I can type D. Okay. So now when I pick this hierarchy, this group, because you know this has all the parts in it, all the parts of the arm. Okay. Now what I can do is, if I go to rotate, see now it rotates where it's supposed to, in the right spot. Okay. And if you want to get rid of that, like say you don't want that pivot anymore, you can go here, and then you can either Control Z out, or you can move that pivot. You can move it back to 0 if you like, or you could do you could reset your pivot. Okay, so your center pivot. So if you could go up to modify center pivot. So I'm going to show you in the next. I'm going to do the leg because the leg has a trick to it. All right. So say you want to just get to the center point of the leg, so you know it's dead center in this thing. Then what you can do is you can go to modify center pivot. Now I know it's directly in the center line of this. And what I can do is then I can go to move. Now I'm going to type my D. Okay. And I'm going to move it up. Okay. Then I'm going to type D. So now my leg will rotate in the right spot that it's supposed to. Okay. So there we go. All right. So some of this pivots and hierarchies and all that and groups might get a little complicated, but what you need to do is just go through and kind of create things. So basically what you can do, let me reference that again. Basically create all your parts, right? So in this one doesn't have the subgroups. So what you do is you go and you select them, and then there's a little video on grouping. We've done groups in a couple other lessons. You pick on all the little parts. Oh, it's picking at the top level, so you're gonna have to pick them individually. And I'm also in hierarchy mode. So always remember all these different pick states. Sometimes you forget. So I'm gonna switch that off. I'm gonna switch this to object mode, and I'm gonna pick this, pick this, pick this, pick this, pick this. And then look, see now they're all selected in here and they're underneath this body group. So when you go to edit and go to group, so now it's become a group. Now you could go in and rename this. I've already got to rename other things. I'm not going to go through that right now. But I could also do the same thing here. Okay. And I can do the same thing. I go to edit, group. Or if I don't want to, if I'm out here, like if I'm out in, I can just select all these. You can also do Control G. Okay, so now that's turned into a group. So now you see if I type W for move, see it functions as a group. Okay, so that's how you would make these bigger groups. And then what you do is you just step through this whole process. This is a pretty simple model. We're just basically making this mannequin. You know, it might seem very simple for everybody, you know, but you have to get used to all these things because these methodologies become very useful later. So like I'll switch that off. So what I did was here, now I had all the parts, and then I copied some of the groups as well. So now I made, so yeah, so what I did was now I follow that along. Now, if you had a really sophisticated model and you could make this look perfect, I mean, you could actually make this scene perfectly, okay? And then there we go. So yeah, so that's the basics of how to, you know, build the mannequin model from the Da Vinci image and to build it with Polygon primitive parts and to group things and to, oh, one thing last, oh yeah, I forgot one thing. I didn't show you how to mirror these things. This is a little trick thing. Let me switch this off, switch this off. Ah, yes, here we go. I did forget one thing. Which group are these in? These are in group 3. Okay, yes, we have everything. All right, I forgot this one very key thing here. All right, so, and this is a tricky trick. Let me turn this off. Okay. All right, how do we mirror these things exactly? Okay, so I'm going to show you, there's all kinds of mirroring things. Like later when we start mirroring polygons and objects, there's ways you can flip something. But this is the grand way to do things and the oldest way to do things in Maya and its previous program called Alias. So if we were going to hit, we're going to mirror the arm, right? So now if we notice the arm pivot, because I changed it before, is here. What I need to do is I need to get it back to the 0 line. So I'm going to type D, and I have, do I have grid snap on? No, I don't, but I could just use X. All right, so I'm going to hold this, and oops, oh, sorry, flipped off. All right, so I'm going to type D, and let me put that. All right, you need it on the 0 line. So now I want my axis on the 0 line. Okay, so I'm going to type D. Let me do the leg also. Yeah, so I did the same thing for that one. So okay, type D. All right, so now those are on the 0 lines, and what I'm going to do is, now these parts you don't have, if you did this lesson, don't worry about it, just do this in the lesson manually, but I'm just showing you some tricks for future reference. So now I want to mirror this whole thing over in that direction. So this is on the x-axis, let's go in the x direction. So what you would do is you go to edit, you need to know the axes which you're rotating around, and you would go to duplicate special. Now this is, we're going to get a lot into this later, because when you want to copy like lots of objects, or you want to copy objects that scale or go around in a circle, this is where you would do it. You wouldn't do just regularly duplicate, you duplicate special options. It's a very powerful tool. All right, so the first thing is always go to reset settings, okay? Because somebody might have had something set up in there. And just remember this is all. It took me a long time to figure this out. And even when my teachers told me about this, I just didn't quite get it. But just whatever axis your object is oriented in, so it's oriented in X, you just, if you want to have it go in the negative, if you want to mirror it, it's actually scaling in the negative direction. So here we go, I'm going to hit apply. There we go. So just remember that. And you have to have your pivot at the center point, because if not, it'll mirror like wherever that is, okay? So now, same thing, I'm going to go through this again. So I'll go through the whole process for you again. So we're going to do a leg. So I pick the leg, the pivot's back at the center point. So you go to edit, duplicate special, options box, make sure that's a -1, and you go to apply, okay? There you go. So now you have the leg mirrored properly. Okay, let's switch that off. Switch this one, switch this one. There you go. So yeah, this is the most basic level of the Da Vinci piece here. Okay, all right, on to another class. All right.